All right, we're live.
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our story board where we share stories, and I'm the one that reads them. I'm Blake, and I'm with Heather, who is our resident artist.
Hello,
And
everyone.
we've had a lot of fun reading some old stories and watching how Heather recreates them on her computerized art board. It's really fascinating to watch. And I'm really glad to be here and glad to be part of your life. And thank you for joining us. Uh, we're just two um, average, unique people who love stories and art. And we're here to share that and hope that you find some enjoyment with it. So we're currently in reading the stories of The Wind and the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. We finished chapter one. Did you want to show your
Yeah, I
completed artwork?
finally finished up the render from last time. That's a problem when you're an artist sometimes, is that nothing's ever quite done. You always kind of want to work on things just a little bit more. And as long as it's in front of you, you'll keep working on it. So I just finished this up this morning here.
Oh,
And
wow.
so yeah, this was from last time. We've got Mole and Rat enjoying time on the river here, with beautiful flowers around them and vines and cattails. Do you have cattails in Texas, or is that just a like
Oh, we
East
do
Coast
have
thing?
cattails. I live in the on the edge of what's called the Great Thicket, and it's very dense, wooded pine trees, and we have a lot of rivers and water, so we have cattails, and you would find it familiar. Some familiar plants from New Jersey that we have in Texas. So yeah,
So yeah, this was the finally the finished render, and I'm looking forward to starting on chapter 2 today. It looks like there's some exciting stuff that's going to happen today that I
yeah,
get to
I
draw.
love chapter two. Heather and I were talking before. Chapter one kind of sets the scene, and you kind of enter into the world. And as far as reading that part, it was a far more poetic chapter as it described the river and poetry style can be a little more difficult to read, but the imagery it brings is beautiful. Today, we're it's a little more story oriented, and I just wanted to say beforehand we're going to meet Toad, and some of the words are different for us because it's an old story, and we're gonna talk about a cart pulled by a horse. It's really kind of a camper, a little wooden camper with wagon wheels that's pulled by a horse. So when you hear the word cart, have in your head, and I think Heather's going to draw that part of her artwork.
Yep, I
It's
will.
more like a camper that's pulled by a horse rather than a car, and that's what we're going to encounter today.
All right, I'm ready to get going if you are.
All right. Chapter two of The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. And chapter two's title is The Open Road. He is indeed the best of animals, replied Rat. So simple, so good natured, and so affectionate. Perhaps he's not very clever. We can't all be geniuses. And it may be that he is both boastful and conceited, but he has got some great qualities, has Toady. Rounding a bend in the river, they came in sight of a handsome, dignified old house of mellowed red brick with well kept lawns reaching down to the water's edge. There's Toad Hall, said Rat, and that creek on the left where the notice board says private, no landing allowed, leads to Toadie's boathouse, where we'll leave the boat. The stables are over there to the right. That's the banquet hall you're looking at right now. Very old, that is. Toad is rather rich, you know. And this is really one of the nicest houses in these parts, though we never admit as much to Toad. They glided up the creek, and the mole slipped his sculls as they passed into the shadow of a large boathouse. Here they saw many handsome boats slung from the crossbeams or hauled up on a slip, but none in the water. And the place had an unused and a deserted air. The rat looked around him. I understand, he said. Boating is played out. He's tired of it and done with it. I wonder what new fad Toady has taken up now. Come along and let's look him up. We shall hear all about it quite soon enough. They disembarked and strolled across the gay flower decked lawns in search of Toad, whom they presently happened upon resting in a wicker garden chair with a preoccupied expression of face and a large map spread on his knees. Hooray! Toady cried, jumping up upon seeing them. This is splendid. He shook the paws of both of them warmly, never waiting for an introduction to the mole. How kind of you, he went on, dancing around them. I was just going to send a boat down the river for you, Ratty, with strict orders that you were to be fetched up here at once, whatever you were doing. I want you badly, both of you. Now, what will you take? Come inside and have something. You don't know how lucky it is you turning up just now. Let's sit quiet a bit, Toady, said the rat, throwing himself into an easy chair while the mole took another by the side of him and made some civil remark about Toad's delightful residence. Finest house on the whole river, cried Toad boastfully, or anywhere else for that matter, he could not help adding. Here the rat nudged the mole. Unfortunately, the toad saw him do it and turned very red. There was a moment of painful silence. Then Toad burst out laughing. All right, Ratty, he said. It's only my way, you know, and it's not so much a very bad house, is it? You know, you rather like yourself. Now, look here. Let's be sensible. You are the very animals I wanted. You've got to help me. It's most important. It's about your rowing, I suppose, said the rat with an innocent air. You're getting on fairly well, though you splash a good bit still with a great deal of patience and quantity of coaching. You may, and Toady interrupted. Oh, pooh, boating, interrupted Toad in great disgust. Silly amusement. I've given that up long ago. Sheer waste of time, that's what it is. It makes me downright sorry to see you fellows who ought to know better spending all your energies in that aimless manner. No, I've discovered the real thing, the only genuine occupation for a lifetime. I propose to devote the remainder of mine to it, and can only regret the wasted years that lie behind me, squandered in trivialities. Come with me, dear Ratty, and your amiable friend also, if he will be so very good, just as far as the stable yard, and you shall see what you shall see. He led the way to the stable yard accordingly, the rat following with the most mistrustful expression. And there, drawn out of the coach house into the open, they saw a cart shining with newness, painted a canary yellow, picked out with green and red wheels. There you are, cried the toad, straddling and expanding himself. There's real life for you, embodied in that little cart. The open road, the dusty highway, the heath, the common, the hedgerows, the rolling downs, camps, villages, towns, cities, here today and off to somewhere else tomorrow. Travel, change, interest, excitement. The whole world before you, and a horizon that's always changing. And mind, this is the very finest of its sort that was ever built, without any exception. Come inside and look at its arrangements. Planned them all myself, I did. The mole was tremendously interested and excited and followed him eagerly up the steps and into the interior of the cart. The rat only snorted and thrust his hands deep into his pockets, remaining where he was. It was indeed very compact and comfortable. Little sleeping bunks, a little table folded up against the wall, a cooking stove, lockers, bookshelves, a bird cage with a bird in it, and pots, pans, jugs, and kettles of every size and variety. All complete, said the toad triumphantly, pulling upon open a locker. You see, biscuits, potted lobster, sardines, everything you could possibly want. Soda water here, baki there, letter, paper, bacon, jam, cards, and dominoes you will find, he continued as they descended the steps again. You'll find that nothing whatever has been forgotten when we make our start this afternoon. I beg your pardon, said the rat slowly as he chewed a straw. But did I overhear you say something about me, we, and start, and this afternoon? Now, you dear good old ratty, said Toad imploringly, don't begin taking in that stiff and sniffy sort of way, because you know you've got to come. I can't possibly manage without you, so please consider it settled. And don't argue. It's the one thing I can't stand. You surely don't mean to stick to your dull, fusty old river all your life and just live in a hole in a bank and boat. I want to show you the world. I'm going to make an animal out of you, my friend. I don't care, said the rat dodgingly. I'm not coming, and that's flat. And I am going to stick to my old river and live in a hole and boat, as I always have done. And what's more, Mole's going to stick with me and do as I do, aren't you, Mole? Of course I am, said the mole loyally. I'll always stick with you, rat, and you say what you say is to be has got to be. All the same, it sounds as if it might have been, well, rather fun, you know, he added wistfully. Poor mole. The life adventurous was so new a thing to him and so thrilling, and this fresh aspect of it was so tempting, and he had fallen in love at first sight with the canary colored cart and all its little fitments. The rat saw what was passing in his mind and wavered. He hated disappointing people, and he was fond of the mole and would do almost anything to oblige him. Toad was watching both of them closely. Come along in and have some lunch, he said diplomatically, and we'll talk it all over. We needn't decide anything in a hurry. Of course, I don't really care. I only want to give pleasure to you fellows. Live for others. That's my motto in life. During lunch, which was excellent, of course, as everything at Toad Hall always was, the toad simply let himself go. Disregarding the rat, he proceeded to plan upon the inexperienced mole as on a harp. Naturally and voluble animal and always mastered by his imagination, he painted the prospects of the trip and the joys of the open life and the roadside in such glowing colors that the mole could hardly sit in his chair for excitement. Somehow, it soon seemed taken for granted by all three of them that the trip was a settled thing, and the rat, though still unconvinced in his mind, allowed his good nature to override his personal objections. He could not bear to disappoint his two friends, who were already deep in schemes and anticipations, planning out each day's separate occupation for several weeks ahead. When they were quite ready, the now triumphant Toad led his companions to the paddock and set them to capture the old gray horse, who, without having been consulted, and to his own extreme annoyance, had been told off by Toad for the dustiest job in the dusty expedition. He frankly preferred the paddock and took a deal of catching. Meantime, Toad packed the lockers still tighter with necessities and hung nose bags, nets of onions, bundles of hay, and baskets from the bottom of the cart. At last, the horse was caught and harnessed, and they set off, all taking at once, each animal either trudging by the side of the cart or sitting on the shaft as their humor took him. It was a golden afternoon. The smell of the dust that kicked up was rich and satisfying. Out of thick orchards on each side of the road, birds called and whistled to them cheerfully. Good-natured wayfarers passing them gave them good day or stopped to say nice things about their beautiful cart. And rabbits sitting at their front doors in the hedge groves held up their forepaws and said, "Oh my, oh my, oh my." Late in the afternoon, tired and happy and miles from home, they drew up on a remote common far from habitations, turned the horse loose to graze, and ate their simple supper, sitting on the grass beside the cart. Toad talked big about all he was going to do in the days to come, while stars grew fuller and larger all around them. And a yellow moon, appearing suddenly and silently from nowhere in particular, came to keep them company and listen to their talk. At last, they turned in their little bunks in the cart, and Toad, kicking out his legs, sleepily said, "Well, good night, you fellas. This is the real life of a gentleman. Talk about your old river." I don't talk about my river," replied the patient rat. "You know I don't, Toad, but I think about it," he added pathetically in a lower tone. "I think about it all the time." The mole reached out from under his blanket, felt the rat's paw in the darkness, and gave a squeeze. "I'll do whatever you like, Ratty," he whispered. "Shall we run away tomorrow morning, quite early, very early, and go back to our dear old hole in the river?" No, we'll see it out," whispered back the rat. "Thanks awfully, but I ought to stick by the Toad till this trip is ended. It wouldn't be safe for him to be out here by himself. It won't be very long. His fads never do. Good night." The end was indeed nearer than even the rat suspected. After so much open air and excitement, the Toad slept very soundly, and no amount of shaking could rouse him out of bed the next morning. So the mole and the rat turned to quietly, and while the rat saw to the horse and lit a fire and cleaned last night's cups and platters and got things ready for breakfast, the mole trudged off to the nearest village, a long way off, for milk and eggs and various necessaries the toad had, of course, forgotten to provide. The hard work had all been done, and the two animals were resting, thoroughly exhausted, by the time Toad appeared on the scene, fresh, remarking what a pleasant, easy life it was they were all leading now, after the cares and worries and fatigues of housekeeping at home. They had a pleasant ramble that day over grassy downs and along narrow by lanes, and camped as before on a common. Only this time the two guests took care that Toad should do his fair share of work. In consequence, when the time came for starting next morning, Toad was by no means so rapturous about the simplicity of the primitive life, and indeed attempted to resume his place in his bunk, whence he was hauled by force. Their way lay, as before, across country by narrow lanes, and it was not till the afternoon that they came out on the high road, their first high road, and their disaster, fleet and unforeseen, sprang out on them. Disaster, momentous indeed to their expedition, but simply overwhelming in its effect on the after career of Toad. They were strolling along the high road easily, the mole by the horse's head, talking to him, since the horse had complained that he was being frightfully left out of it, and nobody considered him in the least. The toad and the water rat walking behind the cart, talking together. At least Toad was talking, and Rat was saying at intervals, "Yes, precisely. And what did you say to him?" And thinking all the time of something very different, when far behind them they heard a faint warming hum, like the drone of a distant bee. Glancing back, they saw a small cloud of dust and a dark center of energy advancing on them at incredible speed, while from out of the dust a faint poop, poop, wailed like an uneasy animal in pain. Hardly regarding it, they turned to resume their conversation, when in an instant, as it seemed, the peaceful scene was changed, and with a blast of wind and a world of sound that made them jump for the nearest ditch, it was on them. The poop, poop rang with a brazen shout in their ears. They had a moment's glimpse of an interior of glittering plate glass and rich morocco, and the magnificent motor car, immense, breath-snatching, passionate, with its pilot tense and hugging its will, possessed all earth and air for the fraction of a second, flung an enveloping cloud of dust that blinded and enwrapped them utterly, and then dwindled to a speck in the far distance, changed back into a droning bee once more. The old gray horse, dreaming as he plodded along of his quiet paddock in a new raw situation, such as this, simply abandoned himself to his natural emotions, rearing, plunging back steadily in spite of all the mole's efforts at his head, and all the mole's lively language directed at his better feelings. He drove the cart backwards towards the deep ditch at the side of the road. It wavered in an instant. Then there was a heart-rending crash, and the canary-colored cart, their pride, their joy, lay on its side in the ditch, an irredeemable wreck. The rat danced up and down in the road, simply transported with passion, You villains, he shouted, shaking his fists. You scoundrel, you highwaymen, you round hogs. I'll have the law on you. I'll report you. I'll take you through all the courts. His homesickness had quite slipped away from him, and for the moment he was the skipper of the canary colored vessel, driven on a shoal by the reckless jockeying of a rival mariners, and he was trying to recollect all the fine and biting things he used to say to masters of steam launches when their wash, as they drove to near the bank, used to flood his parlor carpeted home. Toad sat straight down in the middle of the dusty road. His legs stretched out before him and stared fixedly in the direction of the disappearing motor car. He breathed short. His face wore a placid, satisfied expression, and at intervals he faintly murmured, "Poop, poop." The mole was busy trying to quiet the horse, which he succeeded in doing after time. Then he went back to look at the cart on its side in the ditch. It was indeed a sorry sight. Panels and windows smashed, axles hopelessly bent, one wheel off, sardines tins scattered over the wide world, and the bird in the cage sobbing pitifully and calling to be let out. The rat came to help him, but their united efforts were not sufficient to right the cart. "Hi, Toad," they cried. "Come and bear a hand, can't you?" The toad never answered a word or budged from his seat in the road, so they went to see what was the matter with him. They found him in a sort of a trance, a happy smile on his face, his eyes still fixed on the dusty wake of their destroyer. At intervals, he was still heard to murmur, "Boop, boop." The rat shook him by the shoulder. "Are you going to come and help us, Toad?" he demanded sternly. "Glorious, stirring sight," murmured Toad, never offering to move. "The poetry of motion, the real way to travel, the only way to travel. Here today and next week tomorrow. Villages skipped, towns and cities jumped, always somebody else's horizon. Oh, bliss. Oh, boop, boop. Oh, my. Oh, my. Oh, my. Oh, stop being a fool, Toad," cried the mole despairingly. "And to think I never knew," went on the toad in a dreamy monotone. "All those wasted years lie behind me. I never knew, never even dreamt. But now I know. Now I fully realize. Oh, what a flowery track lies spread before me. Henceforth, what dust clouds shall spring up behind me as I speed on my reckless way. What carts I shall fling carelessly into the ditch in the wake of my magnificent onset. Horrid little carts, common carts, canary-colored carts." "What are we to do with him?" asked the mole of the water rat. "Nothing at all," replied the rat firmly, "because there is really nothing to be done. You see, I know him from of old. He is now possessed. He has got a new craze, and it always takes him that way in its first stage. He'll continue like that for days now, like an animal walking in a happy dream, quite useless for all practical purposes. Never mind him. Let's go and see what there is to be done about the cart." A careful inspection showed them that even they succeeded, if they succeeded in riding the cart by themselves, the cart would never travel again. The axles were in a hopeless state, and the missing wheel was shattered into pieces. The rat knotted the horse's reins over his back and took him by the head, carrying the bird in the cage and its hysterical occupant in the other hand. Come on, he said grimly to the mole. It's 5 or 6 miles to the nearest town, and we should just have to walk it. The sooner we make the start, the better. But what about Toad? Asked the mole anxiously as they set off together. We can't leave him here, sitting in the middle of the road by himself in the distracted state that he's in. It's not safe. Supposing another thing were to come along. Oh, bother, Toad, said the rat savagely. I'm done with him. They had not proceeded very far on their way, however, when there was a pattering of feet behind them, and Toad caught up and thrust a paw inside the elbow of each of them, still breathing short and staring into vacancy. Now, look here, Toad, said the rat sharply. As soon as we get to town, you'll have to go straight to the police station and see if they know anything about the motor car and who it belongs to, and lodge a complaint against it. And then you'll have to go to the blacksmith's or a wheelwright and arrange for the cart to be fetched and mended and put to right. It'll take some time, but it's not quite a hopeless smash. Meanwhile, the mole and I will go to an inn and find comfortable rooms where we can stay till the cart's ready, until your nerves have recovered their shock. Police station? Complaints? Murmured Toad dreamily. My complaint of that beautiful, that heavenly vision that has been vouchsafed me, mend the cart? I'm done with carts forever. I never want to see the cart or hear of it again. Oh, Ratty, you can't think how obliged I am to you for counseling to come on this trip. I wouldn't have gone without you, and then I might not have ever seen it. That swan, that sunbeam, that thunderbolt. I might never have heard that entrancing sound or smelt that bewitching smell. I owe it all to you, my best of friends. The rat turned from him in despair. You see what it is? He said to the mole, addressing him across Toad's head. He's quite hopeless. I give it up. When we get to the town, we'll go to the rail station, and with luck, we may pick up a train there that will take us back to Riverbank tonight. And if ever you catch me going a pleasuring with this provoking animal again, he snorted, and during the rest of that weary trudge addressed his remarks exclusively to the mole. On reaching the town, they went straight to the station and deposited Toad in the second-class waiting room, giving a porter 2 pence to keep a strict eye on Toady. They then left the horse at an inn stable and gave what directions they could about the cart and its contents. Eventually, a slow train having landed them at a station not very far from Toad Hall, they escorted the spellbound, sleepwalking Toad to his door, put him inside it, and instructed his housekeeper to feed him, undress him, and put him to bed. Then they got to their boat from the boathouse, scullied down the river home, and at a very late hour sat down to supper in their own cozy riverside parlor, to the rat's great joy and contentment. The following evening, the mole, who had risen late, and taken things very easy all day, was sitting on the bank fishing when the rat, who had been looking up at his friends and gossiping, came strolling along to find him. "Heard the news?" he said. "There's nothing else being talked about all along the riverbank. Toad went up to town by early train this morning, and he has ordered a large and very expensive motor car." The end of chapter 2, The Open Road. And look, there were
Didn't quite
roasting
finish.
marshmallows on the open road.
Didn't quite get finished, but got pretty much everything, at least like the colors flatted in. So a little too ambitious with trying to get everything in this episode, in this one, but
Yeah,
got the
I
gist of
like.
it.
You know what I like, and is how the glowing of the fire is kind of reflecting in the mole and the rat and the top of the ears of the toad. That's cool. I mean, it really looks like they're sitting around a fire. Well, I mean, they are in your picture, but a real fire.
Yeah, and once I finish up, there'll be shadows on the other side of them because when there's a really bright light shining on you on one side, the rest of you's in darkness. It's a little artist trick there that kind of helps give things a little bit of dimension. That you think about, well, where's the light going to hit you, and then what kind of things is going to be in shadow when that light is illuminating one area. Because there's kind of a balance of a lot of things, that there's light and darkness, and they kind of balance each other out in art.
So without the light and the darkness, then it's just a flat image.
Yeah, like a piece of paper, totally
Yeah.
flat. Whereas, when something is alive and moving, it's playing with the light.
Yeah. I like that. And I think the story is a lot of fun, and I really relate to the rat. He's going, oh, he knows his friend the toady really, really well, but he still goes to visit, knowing that you're going to step in his realm. You might be on an adventure, and boy, they had an adventure.
Yep, they did. And Toad's kind of this very fickle character who goes from sort of one hobby to the next, and he definitely sort of drags his friends along with him, but they still love him anyway. They make sure he gets home and he's safe and he's taken care of, even when he kind of goes off on flights of fantasy. Everybody's a really good friend in this story.
Well, some adults are like Toady, and they'll buy campers and go on one camping trip, and then the camper sits in the backyard for a long time. But when I was younger, that's how some of my toys were. I wanted the next greatest toy, and you begin to ignore the other things that you had, or the next greatest electronic device. Um, um, and the rat's kind of telling the story of, well, it's not all bad at home, and there's some things to hold on to that are meaningful and enjoyable, and the mole just keeps learning. He's kind of in the middle of their tug of war in this story, but going, okay, I'll go. And then how they work to please each other. That's a really interesting part of the story.
It's thoughtfulness and wanting to make sure that your friends are happy and that the people you care about are happy, and putting that little bit of extra thought in there, like, well, what will Mole like, and what will Toad like, and what will Rat like? And maybe Toad isn't being always the best friend, but Mole and Rat are definitely looking out for each other and really taking care of each other's needs, and making sure that whatever it is, that if something's making them uncomfortable, then they okay, well, we can stop doing this if you're not enjoying it. which was what Mole said to Rat. And Rat's like, no, no, let's stick it out. Let's, I'm okay with it. So let's checking in with each other and really just looking after each other emotionally.
And what you just said is really important for all of life. So checking in on each other means you have to speak. You have to speak some things that are hard to speak, like I'm feeling this way. Sometimes for me, that's the hardest thing to do, to speak the first sentence. But the people who really care about me uh, listen to my sentence and go and respect my feelings or allow me to have those feelings. And then together we figure out how to just keep moving in life. And I think that's really important for all of us to live. And I appreciate that part of this story.
And also, even without the deep stuff, it's just fun to go on an adventure. And I think
Yeah,
Mole is really on the adventure of a lifetime with all these characters he's meeting.
yeah,
And it may be scary to go on that adventure. And I think in the next chapter, he's going to be a little bit scared, just a little sneak peek of what's going to happen in our next episode.
yeah. I
But
mean,
it's
can
always
you imagine Mole? He's going, "Oh, this is so awesome," and then all of a sudden, disaster, and then he's going, "Oh, I want to go home now. I want to go home now,"
and he
and they
can
do
do
go
that. He
home.
can always go home once he's
Yeah, they
done
do go
adventuring.
home, but they don't stay there, or we wouldn't have the next story.
Yeah, yeah. Once you go home, you rest up a little bit, and then you move on to whatever the next thing life has for you.
Awesome. Well, I want to be around that campfire.
Me too. I love camping.
I do too, but then I love to wash the smoke out of my hair.
Yeah.
I'm more of
Sit
a
and look at the
camper.
stars.
I like the cart. I'm like Toady in that aspect. I want the cart, the camper with all the stuff.
Yeah, I think it's called glamping now, when you
Yeah,
have the
glamper,
glamorous camping.
glamper.
They had potted lobster as one of the things they were
I
eating. I never
know.
even
Come on, it doesn't not even get better than that. I want that for my next glamping trip. Potted lobster. Well, this has
All
been
right.
fun.
Well, yeah, it's been a fun episode. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Remember, you can always draw along with us while Blake is reading. If you hear the story and Blake is making you think of things, draw your own art along with us. We invite you to. And follow us on all the social medias, Facebook. You can follow us on Twitch, YouTube, wherever you're watching us right now. Make sure to click on that subscribe and like. And we will see you in 2 weeks.
Okay. Take care, y'all.